Thank you for responding. Thank you very much. So we will start. So today's paper is on the application of Good Shepherd position paper on trafficking in programs and projects. What we will hear today, I will try to link and deepen the application of the Good Shepherd position paper on trafficking, and we will also hear voices from the field. I've invited Philippines, Nepal, and Malaysia to share with us their experiences in this area. As with the last session, I'd like to start with the principles. One of the first principles is that all of you are experts on the ground. This session is a guide to mission effectiveness. It's hopefully an integration of spirituality, why we do what we do, from the origins of and our heritage on the Good Shepherd charism, and justice and peace with good ministry practices. And lastly, and most importantly, is based on a human rights approach. I want to share this screen with you again, which we shared at the last session. This is the continuum of a circle of care of the program participant. So as we see the program participants right in the middle, surrounded by family, community, society at large, country, and the international scene. And here we have all individual human beings are rights holders whose rights are codified in the UN international covenants and conventions. And we have all rights have corresponding duty bearers who are the state or state actors who are responsible in fulfilling the corresponding rights in a given context. And why we are present is because there are capacity gaps between the rights holders and the duty bearers. And we heard at the last session that our role is to empower the rights holders so that they know their rights and they can claim their rights. And for the duty bearers are accountable to the rights holders. Okay. Next, we also saw this. These are the sending countries. These are the destination countries where we are present in Asia Pacific. And we saw the Human Development Index. For this session, I've taken the liberty of also including transit countries. In this PowerPoint, you will see India as both a destination and a sending country, because India is so big that within India itself, there's a lot of movement of people, and they consider this movement of people as also internal migration, and therefore trafficking happens in this phenomenon. Then we have Thailand as a transit country. Malaysia and Singapore are also transit countries. I'm not sure whether there are other destination countries that are also transit countries. So as we see here, from sending countries will be those where the Human Development Index is higher. And then from countries that are destination countries where the movement of people flow from sending to destination countries, it is countries that enjoy a better Human Development Index. So for today's session, we will explore the key elements that define trafficking in persons, which is the act, the means, and the purpose. And we'll also talk about the 4P framework to combat trafficking in persons. If, as Good Shepherd, we are interested to address trafficking in persons, these are the two fundamental conceptual frameworks that we must all be familiar with. I will start with the first one. How do you define human trafficking? What is the definition of human trafficking? In the last session, Winifred had covered some parts of this. I will go into this again because for all of us who are working in this area, it is very important for us to know the three elements that define human trafficking. The first element is the act. What is done? So in the act, there is this recruitment. Somebody is recruited from a certain area, and there is a movement of this person from one area to the next. And in that recruitment, how was it done, which is the means? Was it using threat or the use of force? Was it coercion? Was it abduction, deception, fraud, abuse of power or vulnerability, giving payments or benefits? And in the last element, it is always the purpose. In a trafficking scenario, the purpose must always be exploitation. So the exploitation includes, but is not limited to, commercial sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery or similar practices, removal of organs, forced marriage. So if we looked at the acts, the means, and the purpose, for those of us who are doing trafficking, if we are a destination country, when we meet a person who has been trafficked and we do case management, we will surely always ask, tell me your story. And when they tell us their story, you will be able to see these three elements: the acts, the means, and the purpose. And if we go to children and we talk about children being trafficked, in the case of children, people who are below the age of 18, there is no need to prove the means. As long as when you're working with children, you know that there is this act of recruitment, of asking the child to follow the trafficker or whatever the scenario is. The child is moved from one area to another area, and the child ends up being exploited, either working in brick factories, doing work like very fine needlework that only children can do, or in the commercial sexual exploitation, as we will hear from the Philippines afterwards. So for children, there is no need to prove the means. It's only the act and the purpose. I want to go a little bit more into this. I will go into this a little bit more later. We just now spoke about the human rights framework and how it is very important for us when we address trafficking in persons to contextualize it within the rights framework. And I will share this document later when I email everyone with the PowerPoint. This is a document from the Office of the Commission on Human Rights. And in this opening statement, it says, violations of human rights are both a cause and a consequence of trafficking in persons. It's a cause and a consequence. Accordingly, it is essential to place the protection of all human rights at the center of any measures taken to prevent and end trafficking. Anti-trafficking measures should not adversely affect the human rights and dignity of persons, and in particular, the rights of those who have been trafficked, migrants, internally displaced persons, refugees, and asylum seekers. So, trafficking. Trafficking is a criminal law concept with strong human rights dimensions. So when we address the trafficker, because trafficking is a crime, when we address the trafficker, the prosecution is according to criminal law. When we look at the victim who is a trafficked person, we view the victim from the human rights perspective. So what do we mean by this? How do we view victims? In many cases, we will find that victims of human trafficking, when they are rescued or when they come into a government facility or a government program, in some of our countries, the victim is treated like a criminal. The victim is put in a shelter with no freedom of movement, no right to earn a living, especially in countries like where countries where the victims are mainly people who are not national citizens, who are not citizens of our own country. So when we say the victim is viewed from a human rights perspective, we go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where a person has the freedom of movement, the person has the right to life, The person has the right to a source of income. Person has a right to protection. Person has a right to social protection as well. So it's very important when we look at and when we work in a scenario where we are journeying with trafficked persons, that the victim is viewed from a human rights perspective. I will go more into this later. I want to stop here for a moment and ask, do you have any questions on this so far? Especially this part, where the definition of human trafficking, where we have the act, the means, and the purpose. If you have a question, please unmute and ask your question, and I will try to see if I can respond to that question. No one? Yes?
Hello.
Is there a question coming?
Hello.
Hi, please say your name.
Joanna.
Yes.
Joanna. Under Act, there are 5 items here. I don't understand the last one. Receipt.
Okay.
What does that mean?
Okay. Let me give you an example, Johanna. Let's say you have a Vietnamese that has been offered a job from Ho Chi Minh, say to come to Malaysia. So what happens is when you look at the act, there is the recruitment. That means in Ho Chi Minh, the person is offered a job, okay? And then the person is transported from one location, transferred to another location. Right. And when the person reaches Malaysia, somebody is there to receive the person. So that is the 5th element in the act.
I see.
Okay, it need not cross, for trafficking, it need not cross international borders. It can be within a country. Say from Garatola, where Priscilla is at now. The person is recruited with the promise of a job, say a job as a domestic worker. Is transported from Garatola right up to Delhi. When the person reaches Delhi, somebody else is there to receive the person. Right. And instead of doing domestic work, the person ends up in commercial sexual exploitation. That is the act. So the means, thank you very much. Please mute your mic. So the means that we see here would be, there is an offer of a job. That is the means. Yeah. And by the time the person gets to Delhi or gets to Malaysia, you will find that the exploitation has happened, either commercial sexual exploitation or whatever job that was promised in Ho Chi Minh. Say it is a job to be a tutor, to be a Vietnamese language teacher. When the person gets to Malaysia, instead of doing that work, the person is doing something else. Say as a cleaner in the office where the language school is, and not given any freedom of movement. Her passport is withheld, and she's working not according to what she was promised in Ho Chi Minh. So when we see this scenario, the means how it is done, there would have been deception. This is how we determine whether a person has been trafficked. Always the final critical point that we need to be able to determine is whether there is exploitation.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other question arising from this? Because it's important for us to understand this definition when we are doing our work. I'll give you another. Yes, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please say your name and where you're from.
Sister Pamela in Beijing.
Hi, Pamela. Yes.
Hi. I'm just wondering, there are many cases where there was deception involved, and then once the person arrives in the country, and there's a whole network of fellow countrymen, and a lot goes on where they continue in a different way, avoiding the law in a willing way. So initially it was trafficking, and then in the country itself, they are not using their passport and are illegally staying. So I don't know if maybe you want to address that at another time.
I understand what you're asking. What initially started out as a there's an act, there's a means, and I would like to just ask at the final point, was there exploitation of the person? Because we need to be able to define and distinguish between the smuggling of a person and the trafficking of a person. So in the case of smuggling, it is illegal and it is a violation of the immigration laws of a country. So in the case of smuggling, the person willingly engages someone else to bring them from point A to point B without the proper means to enter a country, and it is a for-profit. In the case of an exploitation, the person is recruited, there is a means, but the final purpose is very different from the original purpose. And we cannot say in the scenario of a trafficking, where we say human rights is the primary, is the center of everything that we do. We cannot say in a trafficking scenario that consent is given for the exploitation that the person experiences. Because in a human rights scenario, where the person has the right to life, to security, to a proper job, consent doesn't come in. So it is still a trafficking case if there is exploitation at the end of the continuum of the process. We will see a little bit more of that later. Thank you for asking this question, Pamela.
Thank you, thank you.
I have one question.
Yes, this will be the last question that we will take and then we'll move on. Please go ahead.
About the human trafficking purpose, why it is done. I just make sure that because this is the case happened 3 or 4 years ago, and also the human trafficking in Thailand, they add more about the surrogacy.
Surrogate, yes, surrogacy, yes.
Yeah, that the case is happened with the woman from Laos. They came to Thailand, and also a man from Japan. They pay them to have the baby for them. So one that is about the, how to say, the money and make profits. Even the women are willingly to do it, but this is the against the anti-human trafficking law. Also, I don't know, that can put some point here that you show to us.
Yes, it can be in there because in certain narratives, surrogacy is also part of the anti-trafficking purpose. So when you see this PowerPoint, it says exploitation including, and so the list actually changes. Thank you for raising the issue of surrogacy. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So yes, so I shall move on. To the next bit. So I hope everyone is clear on the X, the means, and the purpose. So the next section that we are looking at is the 4P framework to combat trafficking in persons. This 4P framework is a universal framework that's used by every country. The first is protection, which talks about shelter, safe places, how is our care for the victim. It also engages in repatriation and reintegration. The next one is on prevention, education and awareness. The third is on prosecution, capacity and development of the criminal justice system, criminalization of traffickers. And the fourth P is on partnership, networking and collaboration, develop best practices and strategies. So these are the 4 Ps that are used to combat trafficking in persons. I will go more into this. For us who are doing work on trafficking, whether we are in the sending country, the transit country, or the destination country, it is important for us to be able to identify the acts, the means, and the purpose. And it's important for us to know when we are doing our intervention, which category does our intervention go into? Is it Are we doing protection? Are we doing prevention? Are we doing prosecution? Are we doing partnership? Victim identification is key to addressing human trafficking. The entire scheme of human trafficking rests with victim identification. Victim identification means if a person is in a situation of exploitation, how are we able to identify that this particular person is a victim of human trafficking and not a victim of, say, a labor dispute, not a victim of, say, domestic violence? Because when we say a victim is a person is a victim of human trafficking, a whole scenario comes in. Because the victim is a witness with stories to tell. From the stories to tell, you will be able to determine the acts, the means, and the purpose. And from here, the protection, prosecution, prevention, and partnership comes in. I will show you another slide on this. Here we have these women have been rescued from commercial sexual exploitation. I will show you the interconnectedness of the 4 Ps. So when we approach a victim and protection is needed, in the rights-based perspective, protection is based on a victim-centered approach. I'd just like to request whoever's on the line at the moment to please mute your mics because I'm hearing other sounds coming in. Veronica, please help me to mute other mics. Thank you very much. So protection is based on victim-centered approach, plus partnership and networking. Partnership and networking here would be partnership and networking with government officers, other NGOs or CSOs, civil society organizations. And today's terms, we're also talking about partnership with businesses, where the demand for demand for labor is. When we have this properly in place, there will be increased prosecution of traffickers. So when we say the victim is key to addressing human trafficking, the victim, once the person is classified as a victim of human trafficking, the entire system kicks in. Because in a victim-centered approach and in a human trafficking scenario, the trafficker is regarded in
Trisa, you are muted.
Yes, I unmute myself now. Yes, thank you very much. So it's important that the victim is protected based on the features of human trafficking, is identified as a trafficked person. So the only way to stop trafficking is to have witnesses. And if the protection is not done correctly and is not victim-centered, which I will share with you afterwards what it means, and if the victim doesn't go to court and doesn't give evidence in court, the trafficker cannot be prosecuted. The trafficker cannot be prosecuted. And that's why in many scenarios, we are not able to actually find the trafficker. We are not able to bring the trafficker to court because the protection of the victim is not done properly. And when the victim comes into a scenario of protection by the government and the victim feels insecure, the victim will not give evidence in court. And if there's threat coming in from the traffickers, the victim will not give evidence in court. That's why in all protection work that we do, we must network with government, we must network with other NGOs and CSOs so that we form a circle of care and a safe environment around the victim to encourage the giving of testimony and to be the witness. When this is done properly, you will also find that there's better prevention in the country or the location of origin. I use the location of origin here because like in India, the trafficking happens in country. So when we look at this scenario, all the 4 P's are interconnected. And if for those of us who are doing services like shelter for victims of trafficking, we must ask ourselves, how is our approach in the shelter? Have the victims made police reports? Because only when police reports are made can the whole system in the country kick in. Can the victim then enjoy her legal redress as a victim of trafficking? Okay, I will move on from this to the 4 P's, and I will share with you each P what it means. Okay, in the protection scenario, most of us, as Good Shepherd, we do have protection facilities. It could be a shelter, it could be a safe space. So in this protection service that we do, it's a social service of advocacy and case management. In the case management, we will be able to identify the act, the means, and the purpose. This is ultimately very important because it is when you identify the acts, the means, and the purpose that you know what next to do. So in protection, we give housing or a safe space, medical services, mental health services. We need to ask ourselves, is our mental health is it based on a trauma-informed care? In the Trafficking in Persons report for 2017, there was a whole article there that spoke about trauma-informed care. I encourage you to read the Trafficking in Persons report 2017. We also have outreach facilities, legal services, training and education programs of the victims, state laws on victim protection and rights. We need to know this. We give clothing and food. We also have interpretation and translation. This is so very important. Like in Malaysia, we may have a victim from India who doesn't speak English and we don't speak her language. How do we do translation? How do we do case management for scenarios like this? And therefore, within the Good Shepherd Network, we need to be able to start linking up and working together. So we have education, life skills training, employment assistance, and I've added here repatriation and community reintegration. All these comes under protection. Repatriation means how do we send the person who is in Malaysia coming from Ho Chi Minh, how do we have a safe repatriation for her back to Ho Chi Minh? Normally, when a person enters into a government system, the government will see to the sending back of this victim of trafficking, of the survivor of trafficking. So for us, if we are engaged with the government, we can tell the government that at Ho Chi Minh, we do have people who can assist with the reintegration back into the community of origin for the victim of trafficking. Okay, and in all cases, we always stress whatever service that we are doing for protection of victims, it must be victim-centered care. It must be victim-centered care. There's a lot of literature on this. I encourage you to read up on this because we don't have time to do it today. Prevention is on education and awareness. Training and education programs for the community. When we engage the community, whether in whatever rural village or whether it is youths, whether it is college students, etc., we must be able to have the indicators. We must be able to share with them what the indicators are. The indicators of acts, means, and purpose. What are they? So that the person who is receiving the community-based training will know how to prevent trafficking, how to recognize when a recruiter comes into the village, what the end goal will be, because it all starts with the act of recruitment, the act of offering a job, the act of a promise of a better life. And we have awareness campaigns, advocacy campaigns in prevention, public and private sector policies. I would like to ask you to look at your scenarios in your different countries and ask, do we engage the private sector in prevention? Do we engage businesses in prevention? Protection services for persons who have experienced trafficking, they are now back in their community. How do we help them? Programs that address root causes of trafficking, aimed at universal and selected communities. Many of us here have economic justice and livelihood projects, food security projects, education projects back home, and all these are for prevention of human trafficking. We go to prosecution. Just now we heard that a trafficker is tried in criminal law, okay? In many, many cases and in many countries, the criminal justice system needs to be trained, and the capacity of people like the police, the judges, immigration officers, government agencies, we need to help them to develop their capacity to recognize the acts, the means, and the purpose. And not to say when a person comes to make a police report, this is a case that's not part of human trafficking, but this is a case of labor exploitation. Then it comes under a different jurisdiction, and the person who has been trafficked is not given the full entitlement under a rights-based approach. So under prosecution, training and education of government agencies, police, public prosecutors, immigration, etc., is very important for victim identification. The moment the person can only be identified as a victim for the process in the country to kick in when the person is identified as a victim by the police, and then the processes start. If the person is identified as a victim by Good Shepherd, in Good Shepherd's shelter, we say this person is a victim of trafficking, but we don't do anything after that. Or if the person doesn't want to do anything and doesn't want to lodge a police report, and she says, I just prefer to go back, then the entire criminal law system in the country will not be present to protect this person. Instead, as Good Shepherd, we will just arrange for her recovery, for her recovery from the trauma, and we will try to see how we can send her back to the country of origin. Okay, so in prosecution, task forces come into play. State trafficking and trafficking-related legislation comes into play. Municipal trafficking and trafficking-related legislation. So you can have an entire, say for the whole country of India, you can have legislation on that. And then you can have a different legislation, say for Kerala, say for Tamil Nadu, yeah? And attempted and successful civil and criminal prosecution of trafficking cases. This is very important for us to be able to look at other cases that have been tried and to say what are our learning lessons from that. So for those of us who are in working with victims of human trafficking, we need to know the laws of our country. We need to know human trafficking protocols and conventions. And the last bit is partnership. Partnership with private sector, very, very important. Hotels, travel, fair trade. Partnership with public sector, federal and local governments. Partnership with third sectors, other NGOs, civil society organizations, faith-based organizations. Resource leveraging, how do we leverage on each other's resources? How do we build trust? How do we sustain a program beyond the individual that has started it? The only way is to go into partnership. How do we include vulnerable populations' perspective? If a person is a survivor of trafficking, how do we encourage this person to share his or her story in partnership so that the community will be able to learn better? And we have all these other things on communication, conflict management, management of competing interests. Now I come to this circle that we saw just now. The framework that we do always is, when it comes to trafficking, what are the acts, the means, and the purpose, and the 4 Ps, yeah? And in a rights-based approach, we as Good Shepherd, our role is the empowerment of the rights holders. First, we start with our programs victim-centered. Restoration of dignity, self-worth, confidence, equipped with skills, knowledge, and then knowledge on rights and how to assess rights, educating the community, the society at large on the features of trafficking, the acts, the means, the purpose, individual and collective rights. How do we form support groups? How do we form experts on recruitment? How do we form experts on safe migration in the community so that at the end of the day, the entire community and the person who is moving from one country to the other will know their rights? We look at country and international scenario in a rights-based approach, accountability by duty bearers. So we ask, have our countries ratified and signed the UN rights conventions, in particular CEDAW, the CRC, the rights of migrant workers and their families, the Refugee Convention, the Global Compact on Migration? Have we signed the TIP protocol? Are we familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals? Those are at the international level. And at the country level, we ask, what are the constitutions of our country? Does it have fair and equal treatment for all? What are the anti-trafficking laws in our country? What are the policies for fair employment, businesses, etc.? Do we have social protection mechanisms? So that is the accountability by duty bearers. I want to come to just one last section before I stop. This is very important. This is the Trafficking in Persons report. This report is published every June, so we are waiting for the report this month for 2020. And contributors to this report are actually doing advocacy, and they're holding the state accountable. The questions are always released by December, and submissions are due by January the following year. Just as an example, there are about 30 over questions. The question on prosecution is normally the questions number 3 to number 12. It will change every year, but roughly the questions on protection are questions number 14 to 23. On prevention, there are about 7 to 8 questions from 24 to 32, and others, normally the questionnaire will ask you what are the trends in trafficking, whether are there child soldiers, and whether there are any additional comments. So you will see that this Trafficking in Persons report is also based on the Ps, yeah. Some countries in Asia Pacific, Good Shepherd programs, have started to report to this TIP report on a yearly basis, and we have seen the effect of our reporting that holds our governments accountable, okay? So the next part of this is, we will see in this report, it's not just the NGOs that submit the reports, but it's also the governments. So you can imagine when the governments submit the reports to the US Department of State, they will always have a very good report card. The only way we hold our governments accountable is for civil society like us to also submit our own stories to the report. And so the countries are ranked according to Tier 1, Tier 2 watch list, and Tier 3. Winifred has spoken on this. If you go into the report, you will also see what they mean. And I just share with you Malaysia, my own country of origin. You will see that we have a very colorful tiering system. We started with Tier 2 watch list. Actually, the Tier 2 watch list did not start in 2012, but it started, I think, in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. And then in 2014, we dropped to Tier 3. The government tried very hard, and we moved up to Tier 2 watch list for the next 2 years. And to the government's delight, we were in Tier 2 for 2017. But because civil society reported that although we were in Tier 2, there were many laws and the implementation of the laws were very poor, the government has since dropped, Malaysia has since dropped to Tier 2 watch list. So we are waiting now for the June 2020 report to see what our tier ranking is. Okay, I just want to end with this. This is taken from a report in Cambodia. Women are the buyers, sex workers are the goods, and the brothel owner is the vendor. Okay, so this gives us a perspective of commercial sexual exploitation. So where do we start? How do we start? We start with capacity development of mission partners, you and I, on the X, the means, the purpose, the 4 Ps of program intervention. And this is in line with the Good Shepherd position paper, item 6A. We understand our local content. What is the problem you're addressing with regards to trafficking? What are the root causes? What are you seeing as the effects? This is in relation to Good Shepherd position paper, item number 5. And you ask yourself, if you're understanding your context, what is the impact you want to create? What are the outcomes that you will see? Are you addressing protection, prosecution, prevention, partnership? What are the outputs that will tell you you have achieved the outcomes? What are the activities? What are the inputs? This relates to Good Shepherd position paper, item 6B, D, E, F, G. Next, You develop a strategic plan on human trafficking, incorporating justice and peace spirituality with good ministry practices. This is position paper, item 6C. So this is the continuum of how you could possibly start. It's also for us, if we have already started, to look at this and say, where are we at the moment? Do we need to do more? Do we need to review our projects? Where can we do better? Do we need to restructure? Are we doing the correct process, or are we starting from activities and hope that we see the outcomes? Have we done from the outcomes downwards? What is our strategy? Good questions to ask. Okay, you will have the slides that are presented today. So now I come back to questions and answers. I will stop sharing the screen so that we can see each other. Okay, does anyone have any questions to ask from what I've done so far?
Yes, Teresa and Pushpa.
Yes, Pushpa.
I would like to ask this 4 P's we are talking about. I feel first we need to take up the prevention aspect than protection. Because in countries where there are unemployment problems, there are so many other foreign girls are being trafficked to the cities. So I think the first P will be prevention, I feel, than protection.
Yes. Thank you, Pushpa. Pushpa is talking from the perspective of a sending country. Okay, from the perspective of a sending location. Protection comes in when you're a destination country.
Yes.
And you need to be able to address the victims of trafficking in the destination country. If you look at the definition of trafficking, the acts, the means, and the purpose is only manifested at the location where the person ends up. The purpose is not manifested in the situation of origin, because in the situation of origin, the person doesn't know whether the ultimate outcome will be exploitation. Do you understand? Do you get that concept? So when we do prevention, as Pushpa said, we must be able to educate the communities on what the exploitation looks like at the end. So when the person actually reaches the destination, that person will know that I'm in a situation of exploitation and I need to look for help. I need to ask help. So in the prevention that you do in communities, if you are engaging community mobilizers, community protectors, you are forming groups to be safe migration experts, you must talk about the final purpose, which is exploitation, so that they can recognize all the different forms of exploitation that they could possibly enter into when they leave their places of origin. And for us in destination countries, we must be able to identify the victims based on the exploitation they experience. And when we do the protection bits and case management bits, then we will know from the stories that they tell us whether what the act was and what the means were. And when we understand the acts and the means, then we will be able to progress this situation. Either is to labor exploitation, is to human trafficking. We will be able to select the correct intervention for this victim. If we are not clear about the acts, the means, and the purpose, we will think that this person consented to being trafficked and that she agreed to be a commercial, she agreed to the sexual exploitation. But if we understand the human rights approach to addressing trafficking, we will know that consent doesn't come into the picture and the correct interventions will be taken. Thank you for asking that, Pushpa, because it has led to a lot of other explanations. Thank you very much. Anyone else has a question?
It's Joanna.
Yes, Joanna.
Can
I ask other people to mute their mics, please?
For example, if the person, the victim herself says that she consents to work, to be exploited, then what happened to the process?
I want to repeat again. In a human rights-based perspective, nobody consents to being exploited. Because in the exploitation, that means this person does not have the right to movement, does not have the right to social protection, does not have the right to a fair wage, does not have a right over her own body. So in the human trafficking scenario, when commercial sexual exploitation happens at the end, consent is irrelevant. Therefore, you need to be able to ask the person, how was the act, what was the means, and what was the purpose? And in Good Shepherd, we say that no woman would actually use her body to earn a living. We must be clear on this, and the next position paper that we will do is on prostitution, maybe 2 months from now or 3 months from now. It is very important for us to be clear in our minds the dignity of the person. And no person would willingly prostitute themselves for commercial purposes unless there is a push factor. And we need to understand the whole continuum of this scenario. And for people who have met women in prostitution who have been commercially exploited, when you listen to their stories, you will know that it is not a profession. It is not a job. You don't need to be trained for this. There is no training that you go to. There's no skill that you need. It's just exploitation of another person's body for the pleasure of another person, whether it be men or women, or whether it be same-sex exploitation. But we need to be very clear about this as Good Shepherd. And we have many times gone against the flow of other NGOs in our stand on women who are prostituted for sex. We must be very clear. There is no consent when it comes to exploitation. Anyone else? I want to, one last question before I invite our 3 countries to share with us, and then we can have more questions and answers as you listen to them. One last question from anyone who has a burning question to ask.
Teresa,
yes,
I'm
Flora.
just thinking.
Sorry, Del, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just go.
Sorry, I just wanted to know whether there would be cases where the victims become the trafficker. So because of the, the attraction of the whatever rewards that they could get, it is quite attractive because it is an easy way. And sometimes the victims will become the recruiters as well, because they know, traffickers will know that these are the people who know where to get the resources for new victims. So in cases like this, how do you approach the victim who has become a trafficker?
Yes, Del, there are cases where the victims have become traffickers themselves because of the socialization and the reinforcement of behavior patterns, and because they have been identified by the primary trafficker as a potential trafficker. How do we address this? It's a good question, because now the person has become a trafficker and will be tried in criminal law. So we need to ask ourselves, when we do this work, and when we have people staying in our shelter, and let's say there are 5 women coming from a different country and they have all been identified as victims of trafficking, that's where your case management is very, very important. How do you do case management and solicit the stories from the victims who are in your shelter to identify whether any one of the 4 has moved on to be a trafficker? Because your intervention with this person will be very different. And we also want to share that the trafficker is also a human, and the human rights perspective also comes in for this person. So when we're doing a human rights perspective, it is very tricky, because even the criminal is entitled to rights. And therefore the criminal has a lawyer themselves and goes through the whole due process. So this person also has rights. I'm not sure if I've answered your question correctly, Del, but it's a very much bigger process than we can speak here. But a trafficker is tried by criminal law, and it depends when we encounter such persons, which part of the continuum of protection are we at with this particular person?
Yeah, I guess it will become more complex than
yes,
black and white. Yeah.
Correct. Thank you very much. Thank you for this question. Thank you. Okay, we shall move on. I'd like to, we've got 3 countries. I'd like to invite, first, I'd like to invite Philippines and to share about online sexual exploitation of children. Okay, so Dinah, are you ready?
Hello. Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, great. Let me
my slide.
Yes, let me put up your slide. I have your slide.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this. Thank you so much. I've asked each person to share for 5 minutes. I know it's a big ask to share such a big thing for 5 minutes. Can you see my screen? Yeah. Let me do it properly. Why am I not getting into PowerPoint? Sorry, folks, just hold on. Oh. Sorry, just hold on. Okay, I'm going to share again. Can you see my screen? Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead, Dinah.
Good morning, everyone. So I will be sharing what are we doing here in the Philippines in regards to online sexual exploitation of children. As you can see and as reported way back, our situation now in the Philippines, we are now becoming the global epicenter of online sexual exploitation. Actually, we started addressing these OSEC problems way back, even before this pandemic. But it's just that it became prevalent now because of the quarantine period. So what we do, we are very strong in networking, because we recognize that we cannot do it alone. So we need other non-government organizations, government authorities, and of course, our faith-based organizations. We are very, we are partnering actually with International Justice Mission Philippines. They are actually the one who facilitate the rescue operations with government authorities, because we don't include ourselves in the rescue operation, but we receive the children coming from the rescue. So networking is very important here, as we cannot really address all the concerns of the children involved in the sexual exploitation. Second, we do recovery. Good Shepherd here in the Philippines, we are very known on having different shelters addressing different sexual exploitations. So last 2018, we actually started putting up an assessment center. This is exclusive and designed for online sexual exploitation survivors. We actually place them in our assessment center for around 0 to 6 months. We do healing interventions, and we assess the long-term interventions that will be better for them. Because we acknowledge the fact that many of the OSEC survivors are very young. the youngest survivor that we catered here in the assessment center is around 9 months old. Yeah, they're very young, so we don't actually recommend them to go to a shelter. We see to it that we explore other relatives where they can be reunited, or for some we explore actually a like a foster family where they can actually go instead of shelter-based interventions. We are also very strong in advocacy, because in online sexual exploitation, mostly, if not children, are teenagers who are perpetrated by this kind of abuse. So we do advocacies in schools. Good Shepherd Philippines, we have 3 schools actually, the St. Bridget schools. We partner with them, so we conduct several sessions regarding this online sexual exploitation. We also partner with different communities, even with communities that are very far from the city, because many cases there are OSEC survivors who came from provinces. They never thought that will be end up in this kind of situation because they don't have a good internet connection. But then you know, it's how OSEC works on. They really find ways to exploit the children. We also partner with local parishes in terms of advocacies, especially the youth groups in the parishes. Yeah. Private companies, we started exploring also, so we can also connect and do advocacy with them, because they are very big help in, you know, in having these advocacy sessions. And of course, we use our social media platforms to convey messages on online sexual exploitation on children. But of course, we are very concerned on what we post on social media, because most of the children, because we do not want others knowing that we have OSEC survivors here with us for protection, both of the children of and us, of course, the RGS here in the Philippines. So our social media, what we share is only for general information on OSEC. Actually, OSEC is very, sorry. Here in the sorry. Okay. 2 weeks ago, one of the statements of RGS Philippines regarding online sexual exploitation was actually shared through a a newspaper here in the Philippines. It's one of the advocacy that we are doing to also address this online sexual exploitation.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will stop sharing the screen. Okay. Anything else you want to add, Dinah?
Oh, yeah. Some of our shelters we don't have who don't have designated facility for OSEC, they also accommodate them. Yeah, as long as they can actually provide for the needed interventions of the children, because OSEC still it's still new. We are still on the assessment part of what interventions can be better given to them.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I will stop sharing screen. Okay. Thank you very much for your sharing. I want to encourage those of us who are listening, if we are not familiar with online sexual exploitation, you can just Google, and there are a lot of resources there. It's just that it would be interesting to hear from a Good Shepherd program that, you know, within the Good Shepherd milieu, we have also gone into a more progressive ways of addressing trafficking. And you will find that in today's context, it is very difficult to find the pimp or the perpetrator of commercial sexual exploitation, because they no longer surface. They actually use the WhatsApp, or they use social networking to make bookings and, you know, to direct the women to their customers. Yeah. So any questions that you have for Dinah, we will take at the end. Okay, at the end. I now invite Nepal to share. Taskila, are you ready?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, let me put up your slide. Thank you so much, Dinah, for sharing just now. It's the wrong one.
While she's putting up the slides, I just say namaste to all of you. And I would like to share the Good Shepherd intervention in Nepal. We work on anti-human trafficking, both internal and external. I will share more precisely on cross-border human trafficking. This is a pilot project started in last year, 2019. It's up to 21. And this project emerged or conceived during our workshop conducted in 2016 by APJP, Capacity Building Workshop on Human Trafficking. So from there, this concept of working at the borders, to work on the borders of Nepal and India emerged. And we succeeded in implementing the project in 2019. Just to share a little bit on the context, is like about 5,000 to 10,000 Nepali women and girls are trafficked to India each year. An estimate of 100,000 to 200,000 Nepalese trafficked persons are in India. And as many of you know, that India and Nepal has an open border. That's about 1,850 kilometers of open border. It makes trafficking very easy and surveillance very difficult, because only few points there is the immigration and the police stands to see and check. And since being open border, you need not have any documents valid to cross from Nepal to India. So that makes trafficking very easy. And our goal and aim of this project is vulnerable women and girls survivors of trafficking and girls at risk of trafficking are protected, rescued, and reintegrated in a more responsive and safer communities. And the strategies that we follow, as Teresa already very well explained, that prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership in the base of human rights perspective. So just to share about prevention, we do networking and partnership with other organizations. We have 2 border surveillance booths where there are no police or many organizations are there to do the surveillance. We do the surveillance at the border. Maybe 24 hours surveillance happens in these borders where people are illegally trafficked. And also awareness to civil societies, community-based organizations, both to Nepal border communities and also Indian border communities. Next, we speak on protection. We have a short stay shelter home at the border where we provide counseling, life skill training, skill training, and also entrepreneurship. We them to start a small business so that they can be reintegrated back into the communities. And we also do the follow-up for rescue and repatriation. we are still networking with other organizations like at the border, Gorakhpur Social Service Center. It's a Catholic faith-based organization where they support where the railway line starts to go to India. So at that border, they also do surveillance and they rescue young girls and women, and they repatriate to Nepal, and we take up from there with the legal papers and documents, and we help them, giving them life skill training, entrepreneurship, and then rehabilitate. This is the in gist about protection. Prosecution, we have just taken up only one case. A trafficker is been, the case is in the court. Means we identified a girl from the entertainment sector was taken into trafficking, and somehow we were, with the help of the government and the police force, we were able to rescue. But among the traffickers, one of them escaped, but two are under trial. So we give this the victims legal aid, legal support. The next.
Go ahead, Taskila. It's already on partnership.
Yes. Yes, partnership, we talk about, yes, we partner with local government, NGOs, INGOs, both in Nepal and India, like as others also shared, we partner with, planning to partner, or we are on process of partnering with IJM Rescue Foundation and our Good Shepherd Sisters in India. And in this side with many civil society organizations, civil society, community-based organization, media, schools, and of course with the, especially with the border police force. There are police force at the border. They also we network, we share our aims and goals, our vision, and they also connect with us in rescuing these girls, or girls at risk are being referred to our centers.
Okay, I think that's it. I want to thank Taskila for sharing. So in this sharing from Taskila, you can see the whole continuum of interventions: protection, prevention, prosecution, and partnership, and working right with the victim of trafficking, right up to the government. Okay. If you have any questions, just hold it for later. And now I invite Willa to share, and let me look at Willa's slides. Okay. Just ask you to please mute your mics if you're not sharing at the moment. Okay, I can't get it up. Let me try again. Okay, Willa, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So Good Shepherd position, this 5 minutes, hold on a minute, let me start my timer. Okay. So we based the 5 minutes on the Good Shepherd position papers, and we call it Justice in Action because this is what Sister Claire Nolan first taught us when she first came to Malaysia in 2011. So let's go on to the next slide so we can see the first 3 slides I'll go through very quickly. Earlier on, Teresa showed us the slide where the emphasis was on the program participant. Now, when we first started, we had to look at ourselves first, and this is the reason why my slide starts with you, where we will have to ask questions like, were we trained on the rights-based approach? Were we using the right language, for instance, or were we using even were we networking? So we had to review the program that we had, and a reminder that often comes up when we do this is that there is what the circle in white shows the chrono system, and which talks about the dimension of time. So we were totally aware that this whole advocacy of trafficking in persons would take a long time. It's not going to happen. Things, the rewards and the changes will not happen overnight, and we must be ready for this. So it was with this focus that we started retraining ourselves. So next slide. And so we look at our structures, we look at our systems, and then we look at the government structures, the structures surrounding the person, the structures and what needed to be addressed in those structures, which meant that we also had to look at our own SOPs, whether our SOPs were victim-centered. So we took, looking at it was basically looking at whether or not our own services were rights-based, whether our own services focus on the victim. And a long hard look showed that perhaps we were not there yet. We had to really retrain ourselves. So it involved a certain quadrant of change within the organization at the time, where we didn't even know what the quadrant of change meant. So the next one, the next slide. So we had to use a multi-pronged approach and asked, how do we contribute to public policy formation? How do we participate in meetings, in workshops, in campaigns, in conferences? Do we contribute to the US State Department Trafficking in Persons report? And mind you, when Sister Claire Nolan came in 2011 and introduced us to the report, Teresa quickly took the question and said, let's do, if we have to do 2 or 3 questions and answer them, fine, we don't have to answer all the questions. And in that same month, Teresa, I remember very excitedly, we submitted the report. That was the first.
Our first report.
Our first report, and we kept on. Only have to say that this year we didn't do it because there was a reason behind, very good reason behind that. So then looking at support of the legislation effective in, whether the legislation were effective in anti-trafficking and spoke in favor, of local and international anti-trafficking efforts. And then the other thing that we had to do was to join the networks, because we didn't have the answers, and we had a learning curve that was very steep. So whenever there was a meeting, we would be there. Whether or not we were able to contribute did not matter, because we were learning, and that was in our initial years. Next slide, Lisa, please.
Done.
Okay, so first thing first, we had to ask ourselves, did Malaysia ratify any of these protocols, any of the conventions? So the UN Convention for the Suppression of Trafficked in Persons and the Exploitation of the Prosecution of Others, and then we have the Palermo Protocol, the CEDAW, and these are all the protocols and the conventions that Sister Winifred spoke about in the last webinar that we had. And how have these protocols and these conventions been translated in law within our own country? So for instance, when after Malaysia signed the CRC, ratified the CRC, Malaysia then had to enact a Child's Act, and using that Child's Act internally, we were then able to push the government to fulfill the convention for children. And then we also have the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons. So using all these, we tell the country, look here, you sign all this. I'm sure you didn't sign it blindly, do something about it. So it gives us a basis to work with whenever we engage with the government. Shall we go to the next slide? Yeah, so one by one, Teresa.
Yes, coming.
So in 2011, it was our Good Shepherd Justice and Peace training that we had with Sister Claire Nolan, and was very significant because other countries from Asia Pacific were there, and we were all on a learning mode. I wouldn't say we didn't know everything, but we took on that challenge of saying it requires systemic changes. No two ways about it. So how do we learn, and how do we take on that challenge of, as a country of destination, take on the challenge of looking at the whole system and effect changes, and remembering that it takes time. Now in 2012, after the training, of course at that time we were still learning, IOM initiated a training for the government and invited NGOs. And we went in, and it was significant. And the reason it was significant was at that time, Sister Lorena submitted her name as a service provider in the government shelter. And that was the starting point. And constantly, every week, she would travel 200 kilometers to go into the shelter and then return. And until the government knew that we were serious about providing the services. It was at this time also that we invited the University of York to teach us about the rights-based approach and how to implement the rights-based approach in our system. And that also entailed changing the SOPs. We spent a lot of time in the initial years changing SOPs, changing the language that we use in referring to the women, changing the language when we approach other people in the meetings. So 2012 and 2015, I think Teresa remember this, we had meetings, and all the meetings, I would say 70% didn't come out with anything, but we were there because we were telling people basically, call on us, we are interested, we want to work with you. We walked away sometimes from meetings thinking that, oh, it was a total waste of time, but let me tell you, it created an impression for the organization. Good Shepherd is interested on the issues. Yeah. So in 2016, the government invited us for a meeting to look at the NGO running one government shelter. Now, till today, in year 2020, that has not happened yet, but the conversations are ongoing. Yeah. Then the government also invited us to look into the National Action Plan for Trafficking in Persons. So at this time, one of our staff who was designated as the advocacy person in Good Shepherd was invited to attend the IVLP program in the US, and that is fully sponsored by the US State Department. And what was significant about that particular travel to the US was that she was in addition to our own NGO being invited, there was also the person who was a key person in the Malaysian Council for Trafficking in Persons that sits in the Ministry of Home Affairs. There was also a key person who sits in the Women's Desk in the Ministry for Women, who runs the shelters. So our advocacy person, whom some of you may have met, Karen Tai, managed to build a really good relationship with these two persons. And of course, those relationships normally start with Facebook friends, meeting for coffee, having lunch somewhere. And in that relationship has grown to today, whenever there's a need to look at any policies, they will call Karen Tai. You know, so that relationship has been like super useful because, as I said, it is a relationship, and building that relationship took 4 years. And today, in early 2019, they called us to co-organize a conference on trafficking for the government in August of 2019. They also invited us to sit on the National Anti-Trafficking Council of Malaysia. There are only 3 NGOs sitting in this council. Tenaga Nita is and another organization called the National Council of Women Organization, and Global Shepherds. Mind you, it was difficult because people viewed us as a faith-based organization. But every time we go for a meeting, we do not use the word faith-based. We always say we are an NGO. And that has, I think, changed the mindset of even the government. Although they still view us quite suspiciously sometimes, but we make like we're not aware. 2019 was also when we really started talking to businesses, talking to businesses like AirAsia, and we spoke to our other NGOs who are able to do training for Malaysian Airlines, to do training for Grab. So in all the meetings that we have attended, we identified NGOs who were able to come on, who were already on board and who were willing to work together. So
Willa,
yeah.
30 more seconds.
All right. So Global Shepherds became a co-founder of what we call the Joining Hands Against Malaysia, which is a coalition of NGOs who are working on issues of trafficking. So you find that, we have covered the whole range of working with other people, working with the government, and working with, and also changing within the organization how we approach trafficking. Are we victim-centered? Are we rights-based? There is a constant asking of that question. Only thing, Teresa, right now our struggle is finding that repatriation, that there's a gap in repatriation and connecting with the country of origin, which is a real challenge for us most of the time. And it's something that we hope that with this whole collective learning in the Asia Pacific region is something that we can proceed with. And
okay.
yeah, and we're saying that we still have a long way to go, but the next slide will remind us of that. Mr. Kofi Annan in 1997 said, we cannot wait for governments to do it all. Globalization operates on internet time. Government is slow. So the only enemy here is indifference. Yeah, that the only one we need to care about is our own, and that belief is false, that we are one world and one humanity. And many years ago, one wise woman said something else. Teresa, next slide. She said, love and justice binds us to each other and to the whole mission. St. Mary Euphrasia. Thank you.
Thank you, Willa. Thank you. I will stop sharing screen now. Thank you so much. I want to thank all the 3 contributors to the sharing their own perspective and their work. I would like now to invite from the floor any questions.
Oh, that 5 minutes went pretty fast, huh?
I think it was like it took 12 minutes. So let's not go there anymore. Yes. Does anyone have any questions? Whilst we are waiting for the questions, I will ask you to please do poll number 2. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi, Teresa.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just curious, how has the Good Shepherd program in Malaysia influenced your government? Because I remember when I was there, victims of human trafficking were considered criminals, like they were detained and punished and all that. So has that changed already? And have
okay, yeah. Willa, would you like to share, please?
Yeah, good question. We are, since we started sitting on the MAPO, on the Council for Trafficking, we have initiated a few changes. We did some training in the shelters on a victim-centered approach, but there's still a long way to go. In 2019, in December, MAPO asked us to organize a series of workshops, and the first workshop was on the victim identification process. Now that was significant. It was the first time that Global Shepherds was called in to do a session. We got the enforcement agencies and the NGOs to come together to look at victim identification, which, as Teresa mentioned earlier, is the key to ensuring persecution. And Teresa herself facilitated that session. Thank you, Teresa. And it's a continual, we did another session in January. We were supposed to do more. We were supposed to look at the, to use this session to change the National Action Plan, which will end in 2020. So yes, we are already part of that conversation with the government to effect the changes. Quarantine now is, has been selected to be the victim assistance specialist, which is a pilot project that accompanies the victim from the point that she's rescued to the point that she goes to court and finally repatriated. So if this pilot project is successful, every victim that comes into the system will be accompanied by a special victim assistance specialist and will be able to feel that she is being listened to, that she will have at least some access to justice. And that is just one of the initiatives that is ongoing right now.
Thank you, Willa. We have a question here from Delhi, from Hilda. It says that there are many victims, since the interstate human trafficking for labor from poor economic states to the metropolitan cities are very common. Since there are no other alternative way of living, they easily become victims of trafficking. In such a situation, how can we prevent trafficking for labor in the origin source? In Delhi, above 10 lakhs domestic workers are working, and it will be the same condition in other cities too. Where can we pitch in? This is where I'm not sure you really need to look at the systemic causes of this, and you need to be able to work bit by bit, because it is not possible, because the entire system is so huge in India. Your population is so huge, and 80% of your population are in the informal sector work, are in informal sector situations. So you need to ask yourself, where is your starting point? Which community will you begin to work with? And how will we network with other NGOs? It is now 11:45. Yes, Shamindani, go ahead.
Trisa, I would like to ask from Vila, because in her presentation, I was really impressed, because in Sri Lanka, we have not initiated anything regarding trafficking. So we are also thinking how we can step into it. Anyway, the Vila, how the process was, it was very well explained, and it shows that it's a slow, step by steps they were moved into working with the trafficking issue. So I would like to ask from Vila, they have gone into directly they have contacted the government, and they have taken up the government shelter to start the trafficking with the traffic victims. So I would like to ask from Vila, how the government respond to you when you offer your services, and how the response was, and were they willing to give to you, or whether they have taken it as a kind of threat to them, how it was in early stages.
Thank you, Shamindani. Willa?
I think in our region, the government view us all as a threat. It takes time. The first time that we were rejected, we didn't. We just turned the other cheek and continued to attend those meetings to build the relationships. And I think underlying all that we do, the relationships were the most important thing. That building those relationships with the government person, eventually the government person will remember you when the time comes to have make a significant change. We try not to be threatening. We don't go on the streets and tell the government you're doing this wrong. We don't issue statements telling the government you're treating these persons badly. But most governments require us to go in quietly to work with them to make the changes. From within, they must first of all accept us, and that's important. So I think the first step is to identify the gaps in the government, identify our own gaps, and then work on how to reduce those gaps. And that requires a lot of conversations amongst the NGOs as well as yourselves.
Thank you.
I just want to share one thing about this. It was a process that took many years, and the government only saw 1 or 2 faces from the organization each time. And the relationship was built that way. So over the years that you saw, we did not change the leadership. It was the same person that went in. And that is important for the government to be able to establish that rapport. If constantly we are changing the people in charge of programs, it's very hard to build that relationship with the government because they need to identify with a person.
Sorry.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes. Can you? Yeah. Will you be able to take up your question with Willa separately?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Just email each other and arrange your own Zoom calls and see how to move. Yes. One last question, anyone? Yes, Jacinta.
Yeah, according to Willa, what I listened to her, the challenges, she just said that the connection from receiving country and the original country is the Myanmar, Malaysia authority. And what makes me to think that how we build the network among the good shepherd services from the sending country and the receiving country. And if April, you can explain more how is our good shepherd system in this network?
Is the question directed at Willa, or is the question directed as an open system? Okay. Maybe I will attempt to answer so that in the many places that I go to in Asia Pacific, I have not encountered yet a program that that receives back the victims of trafficking. Maybe with the exception of Myanmar, Indonesia has one in Jakarta itself. But in India, there isn't a formalized program. Neither is there, I'm not sure about Thailand, whether there is a specific program for reintegration of persons who have been trafficked and are returning. So in Malaysia, what has happened is that when there are victims of trafficking, we normally find it very difficult to connect back to Good Shepherd, to receive the person back and to reintegrate the person back into the communities where they come from. So we may need to start thinking of programs like that. Willa, would you like to add on from your own experience?
Yeah, I think one of the issues that I think some of the countries would have is that for instance, like India is so vast, and and for the person to be traveling back or to be accessing the program is also very difficult, because first of all, the reason why they came to Malaysia is because of the high level of poverty. And to be able from their village to go into a Good Shepherd program for reintegration and to learn skills can be challenging, because the person first priority is to pay off the debts that she has incurred. So I think like in the Philippines, if the Philippines have been really helpful to us. They have received women at the airport in Cebu, in Manila, and put the women into a program that, of course, with consent, to help them re-educate themselves and to reskill themselves. So again, if you decide that trafficking is an issue that you want to really look at, I suggest that it has to be consciously done. I want to do this, and this is my plan. And not to have it like, we can do it, we can meet the woman at the airport, but I still have these other things to do. So that leadership in the countries will have to assign at least a person or two to continue pursuing trafficking as an issue.
Thank you, Willa. Thank you very much. And I want to apologize just now, I did not mention the Philippines, which has a very comprehensive program for reintegration of victims of trafficking. I think we should end now. In the chat group, there are so many good responses that have come in. I will try, if I can, to download the chat and to share with you questions that people have asked. One good question here that came back was, are there any success stories with collaboration with businesses and the corporate sector? So I also throw it back to the group here. If anyone has started to collaborate with the businesses and the private sectors, please share. And maybe from Malaysia, which has worked with Malaysian Airlines and Air Asia, and the Grab and the Grab rides, in collaboration with other NGOs, I will ask Villa and her team to just give us a few paragraphs on that, and we will share when we send you the PowerPoints. Yeah. I am not sure why I am not able to pull up my poll for the second poll at the end of the session. It doesn't matter. I think looking at the responses that all of you have benefited from this session, I just ask that if you want to share a little bit more with me how you have benefited so that it will help us plan for our next 4 sessions, it will be very helpful. Please drop me a personal email to share, especially things that could be done better for these webinars. I want to also share one last point about what I read about institutionalization of children. Those of us who have got homes for children, just be aware that in the Trafficking in Persons report, it was mentioned that children who have been in institutional care are very highly prone to be trafficked victims, because they have not grown up in a family environment, and certain skills in growing up in their developmental years have not been developed. So just be aware, those who are running homes, that you really need to be able to share about what trafficking is with the girls and the boys that are in your institutions. I think that's about it from me. I just want to thank everybody. And the next session that we will have will be on the last day of June, which is June 30th. And the session that we will have will be on the girl child. Okay, the girl child on June 30th. And the speaker will be Sister Winifred. So I encourage you, after listening to this, on the World Day for Human Trafficking, which is July the 30th, maybe you will do some awareness programs in whichever area that you come from. Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone, for this session. It has been a really very good session. Thank you for your participation. We're going to unmute everyone so that you can say something and, say goodbye, say thank you, whatever. Yes. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye. See you. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you so much, Diana, Taskila, Willa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, Winifred.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
You have to leave first, everyone, because if I end, it will just end. Bye-bye.
See you all the next session. Bye-bye.
See you, Winifred.
Bye-bye. 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 Please,